Roaring Moon might be getting banned from Gen 9 OU. This Pokemon has had some ups and downs so far. It started off very strong at the beginning of the generation, proving itself to be one of the most powerful new Paradox forms. Roaring Moon became a metagame staple with its powerful Dragon Dance and Choice Band sets. That remained true for quite a while, until it eventually fell down to UU during the Pokemon Home metagame. At this time, Roaring Moon was outclassed by other boost sweepers and wall breakers. But with the release of Gen 9's new DLC, Roaring Moon received a significant buff, and also just fit much better in the new environment. So much so that it is now the target of a community suspect vote to be banned. By reaching a certain ELO rating on a fresh account before October 27th, players can vote on Roaring Moon's fate. So why is Roaring Moon under fire? The main reason that this Pokemon's usage has skyrocketed all the way to the moon is because it received knockoff in the new DLC, which is one of the best dark type attacks in the game, one of the best utility moves in the game, all in one. This is such a significant buff. Before the DLC, Roaring Moon's best option in this department was Crunch, which isn't bad, decent damage, but knockoff is far more powerful, literally does more damage, and removes their held item, making permanent progress. Even if they come in on a resist or something that walls Roaring Moon decently, they're going to suffer permanent consequences. Not only is this a significant buff, the presence of Ninetales Alola really helps Roaring Moon out in finding opportunities to set up Dragon Dance by creating Aurora Veil. This has led to a pretty hyper-offense focused metagame, and that's kind of another reason Roaring Moon is thriving. Defensive teams with Pokemon that can check threats like Roaring Moon, Skeledirge, these kinds of defensive walls are becoming less common. The metagame is skewing way more towards these screens, hyper offense teams, and like Ogerpon Wellspring and Manaphy and these kinds of Pokemon. And Roaring Moon with a single Dragon Dance and the massive power of Terra Flying plus Acrobatics, boosted even further by the Booster Energy item, can really just tear these teams apart that lack structural integrity. And even the popular defensive Pokemon at the moment are struggling against Roaring Moon. An adaptation Roaring Moon has started to employ is using Taunt to prevent moves like Toxic and Will-O-Wisp. Gliscor has skyrocketed in usage, becoming perhaps the new #1 defensive utility Pokemon in the format. And the way it often deals with threats like Roaring Moon is by toxicking them and stalling them out over time, taking advantage of its large bulk. But with Taunt and Terra Flying, Roaring Moon can sit on the standard Gliscor sets forever and just take advantage of them, boost up repeatedly. If you Terra Flying, you're immune to Earthquake, and you can Taunt, making yourself completely safe against Toxic. So the defensive counterplay to Roaring Moon is kind of limited right now. You can offensively answer it. After they Terra Flying, they are no longer Dark resistant, and King Gambit can follow up with a Sucker Punch. There's, 50-50s involved with Sucker Punch, of course, but Sucker Punch usually does deal with it. And Pokemon like Dragonite with extreme speed can finish it off and live hits and stuff. Dragonite is kind of even though it's an offensive sweeper, it kind of feels like a defensive check sometimes. With multi-scale, you can live hits from these threats, and with priority, you can handle them. So Dragonite is kind of holding the tier together in a lot of ways. It did the same in the past. Pokemon there's more fringe options like Weavile with Ice Shard. Weavile's gotten a lot better. It also received knockoff, and Ice Shard hits Roaring Moon pre and post Terra, which is nice. This is a weird one, because in a way Roaring Moon is manageable with all of these things, but it's also telling that to answer this broken offensive threat, you need other broken offensive threats. It's a broken checks broken situation. Even things like Dondozo are kind of flimsy against this. And Dondozo is very passive and exploitable. Skeledirge is not really common. Even Skeledirge is getting its boots knocked off, which is disastrous. Can't really come in safely. You can Taunt its Will-O-Wisp. Clodsire is really not commonly seen because it gets destroyed by Gliscor. Probably wouldn't have the bulk to withstand Roaring Moon anyway. Maybe like a Fizdef Clefable, but even that is getting nuked through by the Terra Flying plus Booster Energy Acrobatics damage, and what can it do back? Not much. It's really hard to deal with Roaring Moon, except you can out-offense it with your own threats. Like King Gambit was a Pokemon that was suspected in the past, thought to be a central broken threat, but now King Gambit is proving to be one of the things holding the meta together. Is it a dominant force, or is it the important thing we need to hold everything together? If we're going to go the direction of banning Roaring Moon, there's so many powerful boost sweepers that are going to replace it. We're just in an absolute mess of a metagame right now, if I'm going to be honest. It's a bit like Gen 5 OU, but I think even in Gen 5 OU, I feel like I have more control over the central offensive threats in the metagame. You think of like Latios, Keldeo, Thundurus, Therian, those Pokemon that dominate in Gen 5. I feel like in the builder, I have options against all of those. You know, you can run Special Defense Jirachi or something, or Scizor, or obviously Tyranitar handles Latios. In terms of Keldeo, you've got like Tentacruel, Celebi. You've actually got decent enough options that aren't too specific that it can be useful in multiple matchups in Gen 5. I feel like I have more control in Gen 5 than I do in Gen 9. Against Roaring Moon, my best bet is, you know, offensively out-maneuvering it or just keeping up the pace. And then this is a very offense-driven metagame. I think it's important for metagame health to have like a good balance between offense and defense. If offense is your counter to more offense, it becomes chaotic and games come down to 50-50 situations. There's not enough time to react to things. You have less control over situations and things become more matchup based, which is, I think, bad for competitive health. You want a variety of different styles. You want to feel comfortable against the most powerful threats in the metagame. You want to feel like I have the tools to handle all these reasonably. That's the mark of a good metagame, I think. And Gen 9 doesn't really feel that way. It hasn't for its entire lifespan. I don't think that's Smogon's fault. I don't know whose fault it is. The game isn't designed around singles, obviously. This is one of the messiest metagames I've ever seen in terms of what is the problem, how do we deal with this, what do we even want? Some people think that we should just not ban anything anymore. Let the identity of the meta just be insanity and broken threats. If you ban Roaring Moon, what's next? We're going to just ban everything, which is good because we don't want the meta to center around these broken threats, but maybe there's no other choice. I don't know. It's a very difficult situation that Smogon is in, to be honest. This is a threat that is definitely enhanced by Terra. So Terra could be one of the problems here, but at the same time, Terra is also a reason that this thing isn't too overwhelming. Terra can handle it. Terra Fairy can gambit, and Terra defensive Terras on other people can respond to stuff like this, so it balances itself out, kinda. I think that even if in a world where Terra wasn't banned, Ninetales, Alola plus Roaring Moon would still be a powerful and dominant combination. So definitely enhanced by Terra. Gliscor would be able to hit it at least, but would it be able to 1v1? I don't think so. It's an interesting dilemma, and I wish Smogon and the community all the best in figuring out the way to tackle it. It's complex, it's strange. It's easy to point fingers at Smogon and say they're mismanaging things, but I don't know. I think the 6v6 singles in Gen 9 is kind of just a mess, and there's no clean solution so far. What do you think should happen, folks? Should Roaring Moon be banned, or should we just let it rip and turn this meta into chaos, full of Veil Hyper Offense and whatever else? Before this it was Shed Tail, before that it was Grimmsnarl Screens, it never ends. And then it was Chiyu Sun, and there's various others of course. Who knows, folks? Thank you to the patrons for your continued support, and thank you as well to everyone who has donated to the prize pool for this tournament.
KO by one hit! It scattered the fight!
The money got different.